The old pickup truck shuddered to a stop outside First National Bank, its engine making that familiar rattling sound that meant another expensive repair was coming soon. Lisa gripped the steering wheel tighter, staring at the red brick building. That had become her worst nightmare over the past 3 months. Her hands trembled as she unfolded the crumpled paper from her purse. The words seemed to jump off the page like angry wasps. Final notice of foreclosure, 30 days. That's all she had left before losing everything her family had built over 3 generations. The ranch had been in her family since her great-grandfather first settled the land back in 1952. Her husband, Tom, had worked those fields until the day cancer took him 2 years ago. Even now, sitting in the truck they'd bought together 15 years earlier, she could almost hear his voice telling her everything would work out fine. But Tom wasn't here anymore, and the medical bills kept coming like waves during a storm. Lisa folded the notice and stuffed it back in her purse. No point dwelling on what she couldn't change. She had groceries to buy with the last $43 in her checking account, and her teenage son Danny would be home from school soon, probably hungry as always. She pulled away from the bank, driving slowly through the main street of Cedar Falls. The town looked the same as it had when she was a little girl riding in her father's truck. Miller's hardware store still had that faded blue paint, and old Mrs. Henderson was still sweeping the sidewalk in front of her flower shop like she'd done every day for the past 30 years. Everything looked normal, but nothing felt normal anymore. As she turned onto Maple Street, something caught her eye near Murphy's Tavern. A man was slumped against the brick wall, his cowboy hat tilted over his face. Most folks were walking past him like he wasn't even there. Mothers pulling their children a little closer, businessmen checking their phones and pretending not to notice. Lisa knew she should keep driving. She had her own problems, and getting involved with a drunk stranger wasn't going to solve any of them. But something made her slow down, then pull over to the curb. The man looked to be in his 50s, with graying hair sticking out from under a weather-beaten hat. His clothes were dirty, but not cheap good quality boots that had seen better days, and a leather jacket that probably cost more than Lisa spent on groceries in a month. His face was weathered like someone who'd spent most of his life outdoors. She sat in the truck for a full minute, engine idling, watching him. He wasn't bothering anyone, just sitting there with his eyes closed. But something about the way he held himself, even in his current state, reminded her of her own father. Proud men who'd worked hard all their lives, reduced to circumstances they never imagined possible. Her late husband Tom always said you could judge a person's character by how they treated folks who couldn't help them back. Maybe that's why she found herself turning off the engine and getting out of the truck. Double quote, "Sir, you okay?" She called out, keeping a safe distance. The man's eyes opened slowly, unfocused and bloodshot. He tried to sit up straighter against the wall, but struggled with the effort. I need to get home," he mumbled, his words slurring together. "Just need to get to the old place." "Where's home?" Lisa asked, moving a step closer. He fumbled in his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. His hands shook as he tried to open it, finally managing to pull out a piece of paper with an address written in faded ink. Lisa recognized the area immediately. It was about 20 miles outside town, near the old Brennan property that had been abandoned for as long as she could remember. Nobody lived out that way anymore. "That's pretty far from here," she said gently. "You got someone you can call?" He shook his head slowly, then looked up at her with eyes that held more pain than alcohol could explain. "Lost my phone yesterday. Lost everything else, too." There was something in his voice that cut right through her. Not just the drink talking, but real hurt. The kind of hurt she knew all too well. "Look, I don't usually ... double quote," she started, then stopped herself. Who was she kidding? She did usually help people. It's just who she was, even when she couldn't afford to be. "Come on," she said, making a decision that would change both their lives. "Let me give you a ride." Getting him to the truck took some doing. He could walk, but barely, leaning heavily on her shoulder as they made their way across the sidewalk. A few people stopped to stare, and Lisa recognized the look on their faces. The same look she'd been getting since Tom died, a mixture of pity and relief. that it wasn't them going through hard times. She helped him into the passenger seat, where he immediately slumped against the window. The smell of whiskey filled the small cab, mixed with something else, sadness, maybe, or just the scent of a man who'd given up on himself. "Thank you," he said quietly as she started the engine. "Been sitting there since morning. Nobody else stopped." "What's your name?" Lisa asked as she pulled back onto the street. "Jack," he said after a pause. "Jack Reynolds, and you're an angel." Lisa almost smiled at that. If he only knew how far from angelic her thoughts had been lately. "I'm Lisa, and I'm no angel, just someone who's been where you are?" As they drove through town and out toward the country roads, Jack drifted in and out of consciousness. During his clearer moments, he talked in fragments about losing his ranch up in Montana, about lawyers and debts and family members who'd stopped taking his calls. "Had everything once," he said, staring out at the passing fields. 3,000 acres, prize-winning cattle, a house my great-grandfather built with his own hands. Gone now, all of it. Lisa nodded, understanding more than he knew. "I might lose my place too," she found herself saying. "The bank's giving me 30 days. Something in her voice must have gotten through to him because he turned to look at her with sudden clarity. "How much you need?" The question surprised her. "What? To save your place? How much?" Lisa felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Oh no, I wasn't. I didn't tell you that to ask for money. I just meant I understand what it's like to lose everything." Jack was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his jacket again. This time he pulled out an envelope, yellowed and worn around the edges. "My grandmother always said kindness comes back to you," he said, his words clearer now. "Maybe not the way you expect, but it comes back." He held out the envelope, but Lisa kept her hands on the steering wheel. "I can't take your money." "It's not mine anymore anyway," he said with a bitter laugh. "Everything I owned is gone. This is just what I had in my pocket when they took the rest." The truck hit a pothole, and Lisa had to focus on the road as they turned onto the dirt path leading to the old Brennan place. But as they got closer, she realized something wasn't right. The property didn't look abandoned at all. There was a small cabin tucked back in the trees, with smoke coming from the chimney and a neat pile of firewood stacked beside the porch. Flower boxes sat under the windows, and clean curtains hung inside. Someone had been taking care of this place. "This is it," Jack said as she pulled up to the cabin. "Home sweet home." He opened the truck door and stepped out, steadier now than he'd been in town. The fresh air and the drive seemed to have sobered him up some. He turned back to Lisa, still holding the envelope. "Please," he said. "You stopped when nobody else would. You listened when you didn't have to. Let me do this one good thing." Before Lisa could protest again, he pressed the envelope into her hand through the open window. "Don't open it until you get home," he said. "And don't come back to return it. I won't be here much longer anyway." He walked toward the cabin without looking back, leaving Lisa sitting in her truck with an envelope that felt heavier than it should have. She wanted to follow him, to make him take back whatever money was inside, but something in his voice had sounded final. Instead. She tucked the envelope into her purse next to the foreclosure notice and drove home, not knowing that her simple act of kindness had just set in motion a chain of events that would change everything she thought she knew about second chances. That envelope sat on Lisa's kitchen table like a puzzle she was afraid to solve. 3 hours had passed since she'd gotten home, and she still hadn't opened it. Danny was upstairs doing homework, the sound of his music drifting down through the old floorboards. She made herself a cup of coffee with shaking hands, then sat down and stared at the yellowed paper. Jack's words kept echoing in her head. "Don't open it until you get home." Well, she was home now, but part of her was terrified of what she might find inside. What if it was just a few dollars? What if it was nothing at all, and she'd gotten her hopes up for no reason? Worse yet, what if it was stolen money, and helping him had somehow made her part of something illegal? The foreclosure notice was still crumpled in her purse, a constant reminder of the 30 days she had left. 30 days to come up with $12,000. Or lose everything her family had built over 3 generations. Finally, she took a deep breath and carefully opened the envelope. Inside were $5,100 bills. crisp and new, along with a handwritten note on expensive paper. Lisa's hands trembled as she counted the money twice, then a third time. Unable to believe what she was seeing, $5,000. The note was written in careful handwriting that spoke of education and refinement. For your kindness to a broken man, this won't solve all your problems, but maybe it will buy you some time to find another way. God bless you for stopping when others wouldn't. Lisa sat back in her chair, staring at more money than she'd seen in one place since Tom's life insurance payout, most of which had gone to medical bills. $5,000 wouldn't save the ranch, but it would make this month's payment and buy her precious time to figure out the rest. But something didn't feel right. A homeless drunk didn't carry around $5,000 in cash. And that cabin, it hadn't looked abandoned at all. Someone had been living there, taking care of it. The flower boxes, the neat firewood, the clean curtains in the windows. Sleep didn't come easy that night. Lisa lay in bed thinking about Jack's weathered face, the expensive boots he'd been wearing, and the way he'd talked about losing a ranch in Montana. There was more to his story, and she had a feeling she'd only heard the beginning. The next morning, she made her decision. Danny had already left for school, and the ranch work could wait a few hours. She needed to return this money and get some answers. The drive to the cabin seemed shorter in daylight. The dirt road was in better condition than she'd noticed the day before, and when she pulled up to the little house, she could see details that had been hidden in yesterday's late afternoon shadows. The cabin was small but well-maintained, with a fresh coat of stain on the wood siding and new shingles on the roof. A garden plot beside the house showed signs of recent work, with neat rows where someone had been preparing for spring planting. This wasn't the home of a man who'd lost everything, Lisa knocked on the front door, the envelope containing the money clutched in her other hand. After a few moments, she heard footsteps inside, and the door opened to reveal a completely different man than the one she'd helped yesterday. Jack stood clean-shaven in the doorway, wearing pressed jeans and a button-down shirt that looked like it had come from an expensive store. His hair was combed back and his eyes were clear and alert. If she'd passed him on the street, she never would have recognized him as the broken man slumped against Murphy's Tavern. "Lisa," he said, and she could hear surprise in his voice. "I told you not to come back." "I can't keep this money," she said, holding out the envelope. "It's too much, and you need it more than I do." Jack stepped back and gestured for her to come inside. "Please, come in. We need to talk." The inside of the cabin was even more surprising than the outside. Rich hardwood floors gleamed under hand-woven rugs that looked like they'd cost more than Lisa's truck. Expensive-looking paintings hung on the walls, and the furniture was the kind you'd see in magazines about country living. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a fire crackling warmly in the hearth. "This is beautiful," Lisa said, looking around in amazement. "My great-grandfather built this place in 1889. Jack said, pouring coffee from a pot that looked like it cost more than Lisa spent on groceries in a month. It was the original homestead before the family built the big house up on the hill. What happened to the big house?" Jack's face darkened. "Burned down 3 years ago. Electrical fire while I was in town, drunk off my backside and feeling sorry for myself. Lost everything that mattered, family photos, my son's things, 40 years of memories." He handed her a cup of coffee and sat down across from her in a leather chair that had probably cost more than Lisa made in a month. "You said you lost your ranch in Montana," she said carefully. "I did, sort of." Jack stared into his coffee cup, like he was looking for answers at the bottom. "The Reynolds family owned 15,000 acres up there. Prime cattle country, some of the best grazing land in the state. My great-great-grandfather started with nothing and built an empire." He paused, and Lisa could see the pain in his eyes. "I inherited it all when my father died 10 years ago. The land, the cattle, the business connections, everything. I was supposed to be the caretaker, pass it on to the next generation like it had been passed to me. What happened? My son died in Afghanistan 5 years ago. David was 23, just married, and his wife was pregnant with their first child. He was supposed to come home and take over the ranch someday." Jack's voice broke slightly. After we got the news, I just fell apart. Lisa set down her coffee cup, understanding now why Jack had looked so broken yesterday. She knew what it was like to lose someone who was supposed to be there forever. I started drinking, Jack continued. At first it was just to sleep, then to get through the day, then because I couldn't face being sober. I made bad business decisions, trusted the wrong people, borrowed money against land that had been in the family for over a century. And you lost it all? Every acre. The lawyers and the bank took everything to pay the debts I'd run up. The cattle, the equipment, even my grandfather's house. I had enough left over to buy this little place. It's only 20 acres, but it's all that's left of the Reynolds legacy. Jack stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the small garden plot. I've been living here for 3 years, mostly drunk, mostly wishing I could join David wherever he went. Yesterday was one of my worst days. I'd gotten a letter from my daughter-in-law, David's widow. She's remarried now, and she sent me pictures of my grandson's first day of school. Lisa felt her heart break a little for this man who'd lost so much. He's 6 years old, and I've never met him, Jack said quietly. She tried to stay in touch after David died, but I was too drunk and too angry to be the grandfather that boy needed. Now it's too late. It's never too late, Lisa said softly. Jack turned back to her with a sad smile. Maybe, but first I need to figure out how to live with myself. And meeting you yesterday, it was the first time in 3 years that someone looked at me like I was worth saving. He walked back to his chair and sat down, looking directly at her. That money isn't charity. Lisa, it's an investment. You stopped for a broken-down stranger when you had every reason to keep driving. You've got your own problems, but you took time to help someone else. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. But $5,000 is less than I used to spend on a weekend in the city, Jack finished. I may have lost the big ranch, but I'm not poor. I've got some investments that survived the mess I made, and this little place is paid for. I can afford to help someone who helped me. Lisa looked around the cabin again, seeing it with new eyes. This wasn't the home of a man who'd lost everything. This was the home of a man who'd lost what mattered most and was trying to figure out how to live with what was left. Keep the money, Jack said firmly. But if it makes you feel better, think of it as a loan. Pay me back when you can, or don't pay me back at all. But don't lose your family's ranch because you're too proud to accept help from someone who knows what it's like to lose everything that matters. Lisa drove home from Jack's cabin with her mind spinning like a washing machine. The $5,000 sat in her purse, but now it felt different. It wasn't charity from a drunk stranger anymore. It was help from someone who understood what losing everything felt like, but something still didn't add up. Jack had expensive furniture, beautiful artwork, and he'd casually mentioned investments that survived his troubles. Yet he'd been sitting outside Murphy's Tavern yesterday looking like he'd lost his last friend in the world. That evening, while Danny finished his homework at the kitchen table, Lisa found herself staring out the window toward the hills where Jack's cabin sat hidden among the trees. She'd lived in Cedar Falls her whole life, and she thought she knew everyone within 50 miles. But nobody had ever mentioned the Reynolds family or talked about anyone living in the old Brennan place. "Mom, you okay?" Danny asked, looking up from his math book. At 16, he was getting tall and lean like his father had been, with the same gentle eyes that saw more than most people gave him credit for. "Just thinking," Lisa said, sitting down across from him. "Danny, you ever hear anyone at school talk about the Brennan property? Someone living out there?" Danny shrugged. "Old man Peterson mentioned it once when we were doing that local history project. Said the Brennan family used to own half the county back in the day, but they all moved away or died off years ago. Why? Just curious." Lisa didn't want to worry him with talk about mysterious strangers and unexpected money. The boy had enough to deal with, helping her keep the ranch running while trying to keep his grades up for the college scholarship he'd need. The next morning brought a spring storm that had been threatening for days. Rain hammered against the windows, and the wind howled around the old farmhouse like something wild trying to get inside. Lisa spent the morning in the barn, checking on their small herd of cattle and making sure everything was secure around. Noon, the rain let up enough for her to make a quick trip to town for supplies. But as she drove past Murphy's Tavern, she saw something that made her pull over. Jack was there again, sitting in the same spot against the brick wall, looking just as lost and broken as he had 3 days ago. His expensive clothes were soaked through, and he was holding a bottle wrapped in a brown paper bag. Lisa sat in her truck for a moment, watching him. This was the same man who'd served her coffee in fine china yesterday, who talked about investments and family history in his beautiful cabin. Now he looked like he hadn't eaten in days. She parked and walked over to him, ignoring the curious stares from people hurrying past under their umbrellas. "Jack? What are you doing here?" He looked up at her with bloodshot eyes that took a moment to focus. "Lisa, you shouldn't see me like this. Come on," she said, reaching down to help him up. "Let's get you somewhere warm and dry." "Can't go home," he mumbled as she helped him to his feet. "Not today. Today's the day. David died 5 years ago today." Lisa's heart clenched. She understood now. Some days were harder than others when you'd lost someone you loved. Tom had died on a Tuesday in October, and every Tuesday in October still hit her like a punch to the gut. "My truck's right here," she said gently. "We'll figure it out." Getting Jack into the truck was harder this time. The grief and alcohol had hit him worse than before, and he could barely walk. Lisa was stronger than she looked from years of ranch work, but by the time she got him settled in the passenger seat, they were both soaked through. "I was a good father," Jack said as she started the engine. "Before the drinking, before I lost everything. David was proud of me once." "I'm sure he still is," Lisa said softly. "You don't know what I've done. The people I hurt when I was drinking, the promises I broke." Jack stared out at the rain. "Lost my ranch, but I lost my family first. My daughter won't talk to me. David's wife moved across the country to get away from me. My grandson doesn't even know my name." Lisa drove slowly through the empty streets, thinking about where to take him. His cabin was 20 miles away, and she wasn't sure he should be alone in this condition. But taking him to her house didn't seem right either, not with Danny there. "There's a diner on the edge of town," she said finally. "Betty's place. We can get some coffee and food in you, wait for the storm to pass." Betty's was nearly empty except for a couple of truckers and old Pete Martinez reading his paper in the corner booth. Lisa helped Jack to a table in the back, away from curious eyes. He was shivering despite the warmth of the diner, and she could see how much effort it was taking him just to sit upright. Betty herself came over with coffee and menus. She was in her 70s, had owned the diner for 40 years, and had seen every kind of human trouble walk through her doors. "Get this man some soup," she told Lisa quietly. "And maybe some dry clothes from the lost and found box." "I'll turn up the heat." Over the next hour, Lisa watched Jack slowly come back to himself. The hot soup and coffee helped, and Betty's kindness seemed to steady him somehow. As the storm outside began to clear, he started talking about his son. David was going to be a veterinarian, Jack said, holding his coffee cup with both hands to keep them from shaking. Always loved animals, even as a little boy. He'd bring home every stray cat and injured bird he found. Sounds like a good kid. The best, smart as a whip, kind to everyone he met. He joined the army to pay for vet school, said he wanted to serve his country before he settled down to take care of animals. Jack's voice broke a little. I was so proud of him. Lisa reached across the table and squeezed his hand. He knew that. I hope so. I hope wherever he is, he knows I think about him every day. Jack looked out the window at the clearing sky. Today's always the hardest. The anniversary hits me like a truck every year, and I just fall apart. Maybe that's okay, Lisa said. Maybe some days you're supposed to fall apart. Jack looked at her with surprise. Most people tell me I need to move on, get over it, find closure. Most people haven't lost a child. Lisa had never lost a child, but she'd lost the love of her life. She knew there were some kinds of pain that never fully healed. Tom's been gone 2 years, and I still have days where I can't get out of bed. Grief isn't something you get over. It's something you learn to carry. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the last of the storm clouds move across the sky. Finally, Jack spoke again. I lied to you yesterday. Well, not lied exactly, but I didn't tell you everything. Lisa waited for him to continue. The Reynolds family, we didn't just own land in Montana. We owned land here too, a lot of land. My great-great-grandfather bought up half the county back in the 1890s, including the property your ranch sits on. Lisa felt her stomach drop. What are you saying? I'm saying I know more about your situation than I let on. I've been keeping track of the old family properties, and when I heard the Hendricks place was in trouble, I did some research. You've been watching me? Not watching, just aware. Cedar Falls is a small town, and people talk. When I found out Tom had passed and you were struggling with medical bills, I felt responsible somehow. That land has been in your family for 3 generations, but it was in mine first. Lisa stared at him, trying to process what he was telling her. The $5,000 wasn't random kindness, Jack continued. It was the least I could do. But there's more you need to know. He pulled out his wallet and removed a yellow document, carefully folded and worn at the edges. This is the original deed to your property, signed by your great-grandfather and mine in 1952. When my family sold that land, there was a clause written in. If the Hendricks family ever couldn't make the payments, the Reynolds family had the right to buy it back at the original price. Lisa's hands trembled as she unfolded the document. The legal language was old-fashioned and hard to understand, but she could make out the important parts. There it was, in black and white, a clause that could either save her ranch or destroy everything she'd been fighting for. Why are you telling me this? She whispered. Jack leaned forward, his eyes clearer than she'd seen them since the day they met. Because I'm tired of being the kind of man who takes advantage of other people's troubles. Because you showed kindness to a stranger when you had every reason to walk away. And because maybe helping you is the first step toward becoming the kind of man my son would be proud of again. Lisa stared at the old deed until the words blurred together. Her hands shook as she tried to understand what this meant for her family's future. The original price listed on the document was $800, what her great-grandfather had paid for 160 acres of prime farmland back in 1952. I don't understand, she said finally. Are you saying you could take my ranch for $800? Jack folded his hands on the table, looking older than his 50-something years. Legally, yes. But that's not why I'm telling you this. Then why? Because I want to tear up this deed. Right here, right now. I want you to watch me destroy the last legal connection between my family and that land. Jack's voice was steady, but Lisa could see his hands trembling slightly. Your family has worked that soil for 70 years. It belongs to you, not to some broken-down drunk who can't even take care of himself. Lisa felt tears prick her eyes. Jack, I can't let you do that. If this deed is real, it could be worth millions. Money can't bring back my son. Money can't undo the mistakes I've made, or give me back the family I lost. Jack pulled out a lighter from his pocket. But maybe helping someone who deserves help can be a start. Before Lisa could stop him, Jack held the flame to the corner of the deed. The old paper caught quickly, burning bright for a moment before crumbling to ash in the diner's ashtray. There, he said quietly. Now it's just your land, the way it should be? Lisa wiped her eyes with her napkin. Why would you do that for someone you barely know? Because 5 days ago I was ready to give up completely. I'd been sitting in that spot outside Murphy's for hours, drinking and thinking about how easy it would be to just disappear. Then you stopped. You looked at me like I was worth saving, even when I didn't believe it myself. The diner fell quiet except for the soft sounds of Betty cleaning glasses behind the counter. Finally, Lisa spoke. What happens now? Now you go home and make that bank payment with the money I gave you? And if you're willing, maybe we can figure out how to save the rest of your ranch together. Over the next few days, Jack proved to be full of surprises. He showed up at Lisa's ranch early Tuesday morning, sober and clear-eyed, wearing work clothes and carrying a thermos of coffee that smelled better than anything she'd made in her own kitchen. Thought you could use some help with the morning, Chores, he said, as if showing up to help with cattle at dawn was the most natural thing in the world. Lisa had been managing the ranch mostly alone since Tom died, with Danny helping when he wasn't in school. Having another pair of experienced hands made everything easier, but it was more than that. Jack knew cattle in a way that only came from years of working with them. "Your fence line needs work," he said as they walked through the pasture that morning, "and you've got some sick cattle in the south field that need attention." "I know," Lisa said defensively. "I just haven't had time to get to everything." "Wasn't criticizing," Jack said gently. "Just offering to help. I've got time, and I know cattle." By the end of the week, Jack had become a regular fixture around the ranch. He fixed the broken fence, treated the sick cattle, and reorganized the barn in a way that made the daily workflow smoother. More importantly, he listened when Lisa talked about her struggles with the business side of ranching. Tom always handled the books and the selling, she admitted one evening as they sat on her front porch watching the sunset. "I know how to work cattle and fix equipment, but I'm lost when it comes to markets and buyers and all that business stuff." "What are you getting per pound for your beef?" Jack asked. Lisa told him, and Jack winced. "Lisa, you're getting robbed. That's about half what you should be making." "It's what the buyer in town offered. I didn't know I had other options." Jack pulled out his phone and started scrolling through contacts. "I still know people in the business. Good people who pay fair prices for quality beef. Let me make some calls." Within a week, Jack had Lisa connected with 3 different buyers, all offering significantly more than what she'd been getting. More importantly, he helped her understand the business side of ranching in a way that Tom never had. "Your husband was protecting you from the stress of it," Jack explained one afternoon as they went over her books. "But now that you're running things alone, you need to know how all the pieces fit together." Danny took to Jack immediately, which surprised Lisa. Her son had been protective of their small family since his father died, suspicious of anyone who tried to get too close to his mother. But Jack treated the teenager like an adult, teaching him things about cattle management that he'd never learned from his father. "Mr. Jack says I could study agricultural business in college," Danny told his mother one evening. "Says there's good money in knowing both the farming side and the business side," Lisa smiled, watching her son's excitement. Tom had always assumed Danny would take over the ranch someday, but they'd never talked about preparing him for the business aspects of it. As the weeks passed, Jack seemed to grow stronger and more focused. The lost, broken man Lisa had found outside Murphy's Tavern was being replaced by someone who had purpose again. He still had bad days when the grief over losing David hit him hard, but Lisa learned to recognize the signs and make sure he wasn't alone during the worst of it. "You're good at this," he told her one morning as they worked together to deliver a difficult calf. "Tom taught you well." "Tom never dealt with a breech birth," Lisa said, concentrating on the task at hand. "This is all you—" When they finally got the calf delivered safely, both covered in mud and exhausted, Jack grinned at her in a way that made him look 10 years younger. "We make a good team," he said. Lisa had to admit they did. Jack's knowledge of cattle and business, combined with her hard work and determination, was transforming the ranch. They were producing more beef, getting better prices, and for the first time since Tom died, Lisa felt like she might actually be able to keep the place, but she also noticed other changes. Jack had started talking about the future in a way he hadn't when they first met. He mentioned plans for expanding the herd, ideas for improving the pasture, and strategies for building relationships with more buyers. "You're talking like you're going to be here long-term," Lisa observed one evening. Jack was quiet for a moment, staring out at the cattle grazing in the distance. "Maybe I am." "If you'll have me, what does that mean?" "It means I've been thinking about what David would want me to do with the rest of my life. And I think he'd want me to use what I know to help good people like you." Jack turned to look at her. "I've got more money than I can spend, more knowledge about ranching than I'm using, and no family left to share it with. Maybe this is how I'm supposed to honor his memory." Lisa felt something shift in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt since Tom died. Not romantic love. They were both too broken for that, too focused on survival and healing. but partnership, friendship, the kind of deep connection that comes from working side by side towards something meaningful. Jack, she said carefully, are you asking to buy into the ranch? I'm asking to help you build something that lasts. Something we can both be proud of. Jack stood up and walked to the porch railing. I can't bring back my son, and you can't bring back your husband. But maybe together we can build something good from what's left. Lisa thought about the foreclosure notice that was no longer a threat, about Danny's excitement over learning the business side of ranching, and about how different her life had become since she stopped to help a stranger outside Murphy's Tavern. Partners? She asked. Jack turned back to her with a smile that reached his eyes for the first time since she'd known him. Partners? 6 months after that rainy day at Betty's diner, Lisa barely recognized her own life. The ranch was thriving in ways she'd never imagined possible. Their cattle were healthier, their pastures were greener, and the bank account that had once kept her awake at night now showed a balance that made her feel secure for the first time since Tom's death. But the biggest change wasn't in the numbers on her bank statement. It was in the easy partnership she'd developed with Jack, the way they worked together like they'd been doing it for years instead of months. Danny had started calling him Uncle Jack, and the teenager spent every free moment learning everything Jack could teach him about cattle, business, and life. Mom, did you know Uncle Jack used to own 15,000 acres in Montana? Danny asked one evening as they sat around the kitchen table going over the ranch books. It had become their routine, the three of them planning and dreaming together about the future of their small operation. He told me, Lisa said, smiling at the way her son's eyes lit up when he talked about the bigger picture of ranching. College applications were due soon, and Danny had decided to study agricultural business. Inspired by everything Jack had taught him, Jack looked up from the papers he was reviewing. That's all in the past, son. What matters is what we're building here. But Lisa had noticed changes in Jack over the past few weeks. He'd been quieter than usual, and sometimes she caught him staring off into the distance with an expression she couldn't read. He'd also been making trips to town more often, saying he had business to take care of, but never explaining what kind of business. On a crisp October morning, Jack didn't show up for the usual morning chores. Lisa waited an hour before walking over to his cabin, worried that he might be having one of his difficult days. She found him sitting on his front porch, dressed in his best clothes, with an envelope in his hands. You okay? She asked, settling into the chair beside him. Better than I've been in years, Jack said, but his voice sounded strange. Lisa, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you weeks ago. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. What's wrong? Jack was quiet for a long moment, watching the morning mist rise from the pasture. Remember when I told you about losing everything in Montana? About the lawyers and the debts? Of course. Well, I wasn't completely honest about how that story ended. Jack turned to look at her with eyes that held both sadness and something else. Peace, maybe. About 3 months ago, I got a call from my lawyer up north. Turns out the man who bought my ranch had been running an illegal operation. The government seized the property, and because of some legal technicalities, it reverted back to me. Lisa stared at him. You got your ranch back? All 15,000 acres? The house was gone, but the land came back clean and clear, worth about $12 million. Jack handed her the envelope he'd been holding. I've been working with lawyers and real estate people for weeks, trying to figure out what to do with it. Lisa's hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside were legal documents that looked official and intimidating, covered with words she didn't understand. What is this? It's a deed transfer. I'm signing half of that Montana property over to you and Danny, 7,500 acres. Worth about $6 million. Lisa dropped the papers like they'd caught fire. Jack, no. I can't accept this. It's too much. It's not enough, Jack said quietly. Lisa, you saved my life that day outside Murphy's Tavern. Not just by giving me a ride home, but by showing me that I was still worth saving. You gave me a reason to get sober, a purpose for staying alive, and a family when I thought I'd lost mine forever. We're partners. You don't owe me anything. Jack stood up and walked to the porch railing, his back to her. There's something else. Something I found out last week when I went for my regular checkup with Dr. Morrison. Lisa felt cold all of a sudden. What kind of something? Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, Dr. Morrison says I've got maybe 4 to 6 months, if I'm lucky. The words hit Lisa like a physical blow. She stood up so fast her chair rocked backward. No, she said. No, that's not possible. You're healthy. You're strong. You work 12 hours a day without getting tired. I've been having symptoms for months, Jack said, still facing away from her. The tiredness, the weight loss, the stomach problems. I kept telling myself it was just stress or getting older. But last week when Dr. Morrison ran the tests, Jack turned around and Lisa could see tears in his eyes. I'm dying, Lisa, and I'm okay with that. For the first time in 5 years, I'm okay with whatever comes next, because I know I've done something good with the time I had left. Lisa sank back into her chair, trying to process what he was telling her. There has to be treatment. Surgery or chemotherapy or something. At my age, with this kind of cancer, treatment would just make the time I have left miserable without really extending it. I'd rather spend my last months here with you and Danny helping you build something that will last. They sat in silence for a while, watching the cattle graze in the distance. Finally, Lisa spoke. What about your daughter? Your grandson? Shouldn't they know? Jack's face crumpled slightly. I called Jenny last week, my daughter. We talked for 3 hours, the first real conversation we've had since David's funeral. She's bringing my grandson to visit next month. His name is Michael, and he's 8 years old now. That's wonderful. I'm leaving them money, too. Enough to make sure Michael can go to college and Jenny never has to worry about anything. But the Montana land, that's for you and Danny. You're the ones who gave me back my life when I'd given up on myself. Lisa wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I don't know what to say. Say you'll use it wisely. Say you'll teach Danny everything he needs to know about running a big operation. And say you'll remember me as someone who tried to do right in the end, instead of someone who spent 5 years feeling sorry for himself. Over the next few weeks, Jack threw himself into preparing Lisa and Danny for what was coming. He spent hours teaching Danny advanced cattle management techniques, introduced Lisa to contacts all over the region, and helped them develop a 5-year plan for expanding their operation. The Montana property has a house that's about 10 years old, he told them one evening as they went over maps and surveys. Built it to replace the one that burned down. It's got a modern kitchen, 4 bedrooms, and an office that overlooks the best grazing land you've ever seen. Jack, we can't just take your family's legacy, Lisa protested for the 100th time. You're not taking it. I'm giving it to you. Jack folded the maps carefully. Besides, you are my family now, you and Danny and Jenny and Michael. We're not connected by blood, but we're connected by something stronger. As winter approached, Jack's health began to decline more noticeably. He tired easier and had to rest more often, but his spirits remained good. Jenny brought Michael for Thanksgiving, and Lisa watched Jack transform in his grandson's presence. The boy was curious and smart, asking a million questions about cattle and ranch life. Grandpa Jack, are you really going to heaven soon? Michael asked one afternoon as they sat by the fireplace. I think so, buddy, Jack said, pulling the boy close. But I'm not scared about it. You know why? Why? Because I know I'm leaving. Behind people I love who will take care of each other. And because I finally did something that would make your daddy proud of me. On Christmas morning, Jack was too weak to get out of bed, but he insisted that Lisa and Danny open their presents in his bedroom. Along with the usual gifts, he had one final surprise, a framed copy of the original deed to the Montana property, with all their names on it. Now it's official, he said with a weak smile. The Hendricks Reynolds Ranch has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Jack passed away peacefully on New Year's Day, with Lisa holding one hand and Danny holding the other. His last words were about David, about how proud he was to finally be the kind of man his son could look up to. At the funeral, Jenny stood up to speak about her father. For 5 years after my brother died, I thought I'd lost my dad too, she said. But in his last 6 months, he became the father I remembered from my childhood. He did that because two people showed him kindness when he needed it most, and reminded him that it's never too late to choose love over despair. 6 months. Later, Lisa stood on the porch of the Montana ranch house, watching Danny work with the cattle in the distance. The boy had grown 6 inches and seemed to add new confidence every day. He'd been accepted to the state university's agricultural program with a full scholarship, but he'd decided to defer for a year to help get the expanded operation running. Smoothly in her pocket was a letter from Jenny, thanking her for giving her father peace in his final months. In her heart was a gratitude so deep it sometimes took her breath away. She thought about that rainy day outside Murphy's Tavern, about the split-second decision to stop and help a stranger. She'd thought she was just giving a ride to someone who needed help getting home. She never imagined that her small act of kindness would grow into something that would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone whose life Jack had touched. As the sun set over the Montana hills, Lisa whispered a prayer of thanks for broken-down strangers, second chances, and the mysterious ways that love finds its way back into the world.